All right, so this Torah portion is called Pinchas, or some people say Phineas, but Pinchas. And it begins in Numbers chapter 25, verse 10. It's going to go over into chapter 29. So I'll begin with verse 10 and read through verse 13. It says, Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Pinchas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, has turned back my wrath from the children of Israel, because he was zealous with my zeal among them, so that I did not consume the children of Israel in my zeal. Therefore say, Behold, I give to him my covenant of peace, and it shall be to him and his descendants after him a covenant of an everlasting priesthood, because he was zealous for his God and made atonement for the children of Israel. And so this portion begins with the continuation of Pinchas' actions that occurred at the end of the last Torah portion, the one called Balak, when he took a javelin to Zimri, the Simeonite, and the Midianite woman Cosbi, because apparently they were having relations near the door of the tent of meeting. In other words, they flaunted their sin in God's face, daring him to act. Dangerous position to take. And so they and these others who had joined themselves to the Baal of Peor provoked a plague that was sweeping through the camp. Of course, just very quickly, the sin of Baal Peor, what was that? It has to do with the doctrine of Balaam, who cast a stumbling block before the children of Israel. And so he could not curse God's people because God had blessed them, but he devised a plan whereby the people, those who were on the fringes, so to speak, would bring a curse upon themselves, bring destruction upon themselves, because the beautiful daughters of Midian and Moab were sent in to the edges of the camp to seduce the sons of Israel. And so these men joined themselves with these women at a sacrificial meal dedicated to the Baal of Peor. It always starts with food. Interesting. Anyway. Now, just very quickly, Baal. You know, we hear that term all the time. Most of us have heard it all of our lives. But I want you to understand that that's not just the name of some idol. It's not just the name of some false god. It is a term that is used in Scripture whose real meaning is husband. In fact, Abraham is referred to as Baal at one point. So it is a term that denotes a husband. And so what they were doing, these people of Israel, these sons of Israel, they were committing spiritual harlotry. And they were joining themselves to another husband, as it were, when they joined themselves to these women of Midian. So that's what provoked this plague. And then Zimri and Cosbi, they engaged in this activity. And then Pinchas says, enough of that, took a javelin and put an end to it. And so I'm not going to expound too much on those things because we've talked about them before. We've talked about this particular snare that the adversary always sets for God's people. He dangles something out there that looks very attractive. It always looks good, but he always conceals the evil. He always conceals the poison. And the reason he keeps going back to that is because it works again and again and again and again. But we've talked about that before. Everybody here should be well acquainted with that. We've also talked about the benefit of Pinchas' zeal for God's house. And, well, interestingly enough, when he takes this javelin and runs these people through, he does not receive a condemnation from God. He receives a commendation from God. He's promoted. He's made priest, and those of his descendants after him. But here's what it boils down to for me. Because he would not permit God's house to be disrespected. God uses the word zeal several times in the verses that we read, but his zeal is motivated by the fact that he will not allow God's house to be disrespected in this manner. So from there, let's jump over and consider what Yeshua did one time. When he went into the temple and he found the money changers and people selling all this merchandise and all these things, and he got upset. Matthew 21. Verse 12, Then Yeshua went into the temple of God and drove out all those who bought and sold in the temple. He overturned the table of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. And by the way, it doesn't mention it right here in what I'm reading, but you do know that he made a whip out of cords. And I think I mentioned this perhaps, but I've wondered if it was in a threefold cord. Nonetheless, he made a whip out of cords. Is everybody okay over there? All right, very good. And he chased these people out of the temple, and he said to them, "It is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves." So in support of his action, being zealous for his father's house, by the way, action that was criticized by many people. Who do you think you are? What are you doing? And all these kinds of things. So zeal for God's house will often be criticized for those who have no respect for God's house. Keep that in mind, all right? But anyway, to support his action, he quotes Isaiah 56 and Jeremiah chapter 7. Isaiah 56 speaks to the purpose of God's house, that there is going to be a place in his house for all those who seek after him, all those who want to honor him. You know, the son of the foreigner is mentioned. The one who is the, mine just went blank, eunuch. Huh? Yeah, I got it. Thank you. Anyway, he says, I'll make a place for them in my house because my house is going to be called a house of prayer for all nations. So he's speaking to the purpose of God's house in Isaiah 56. But he also quotes Jeremiah 7. And Jeremiah speaks to what happens when his people have no respect for his house. Because before the destruction of the temple, he says this through Jeremiah in chapter 7, verse 11. Has this house, which is called by my name, become a den of thieves in your eyes? Behold, even I have seen it, says the Lord. But go now to my place, which was in Shiloh, where I set my name at the first, and see what I did to it because of the wickedness of my people Israel. So just to kind of summarize here, Pinchas is commended because of his zeal for God's house. Again, boiling it down. He was not going to stand by and see someone disrespect and desecrate God's house in that manner. And so he took action. And he is rewarded for it. And there's criticism that comes because of that. But nevertheless, God promotes him to priest. And this zeal for God's house is connected to the Messiah himself. But in Jeremiah, and again, this is kind of important to get because Messiah quoted this passage. He's calling that house in Jeremiah's day a den of thieves. And he challenges the people in that time to go and see what became of the tabernacle that was at Shiloh, what I did to it because of the wickedness of my people. So what happened to the sanctuary that had been at Shiloh? Presumably it was destroyed about the same time when the ark was taken captive by the Philistines. This is in the days of Eli the high priest and his two sons, Hophni and Pinchas. By the way, that name Pinchas, it either means a mouth of brass or the mouth of a serpent. And to me, it almost infers that Pinchas can be good and can be not so good. And so we have one Pinchas here is doing something that the Father commends, and we have another Pinchas doing something that the Father condemns. Interesting. It's interesting that this son of Eli is a priest who has the same name as the son of Eleazar. However, the Bible does not describe this other Pinchas as the son of Eli as much as he is describing him as a son of Belial, along with his brother. It says that these were sons of Belial and they did not know the Lord. So this is in the tabernacle of Shiloh. We're here because in Jeremiah 7 he asked the question, go check out what I did to that tabernacle that was in Shiloh, where I first put my name. See what I did to it because of the wickedness of my people. And so we have these two men, Hophni and Pinchas, these sons of Belial, who with their father's knowledge, by the way, essentially did the very same thing that got Zimri and Cosby skewered. Go read what they did. Read what they were guilty of. They were basically doing the same thing that was going on when the first Pinchas takes a javelin and goes into their tent. Interesting. So instead of staying the moral decline as the former Pinchas did, these two actually kind of provoked the moral decline. They were in large part responsible for it because they had no respect for God's house. They dishonored him before the people. To the degree, this is recorded in 1 Samuel chapter 2, to the degree that men of Israel began to abhor the offering of the Lord. In other words, men of Israel began to get a really bad taste in their mouth about the God of Israel because of the way he was being represented in his house. So if those who serve in his house have no respect for his house, how could they expect those who come to his house to worship to have respect for it? So you see where I'm going with this, don't you? It behooves us all to have respect for his house. Now I know that where we're gathered here today it's not the temple. I realize that. It doesn't rise to the level of being the place where the Father has set his name as recorded in Scripture. But it is the place that you and I have mutually agreed, by the fact that you're here, we have mutually agreed that when we come into this place, we come here for a purpose. And the primary purpose is to honor him, to worship him. Is that right? And if you're not here primarily for that reason, you might be in the wrong place. Now, I'm all for socializing, all for that. I'm all for fellowshipping. What'd you say? No, I was not going to say socialism. Just cool your jets there, grasshopper, okay? I'm surprised he doesn't have his MAGA hat. Anyway, I'm all for socializing, fellowship, coming together, even having fun and breaking bread. Those are all important parts of what we do. But those are parts of what we do. The primary focus here today is to honor the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Right? And so, again, we have mutually agreed that when we come into this place to honor him, this is a sacred space. Do we agree? Amen? And if we agree on that, we should also agree that being a sacred space that we have consecrated to serve him, then we should consider this his house, and we need to respect that. Can you agree with that? So then, we need to make certain that we represent him in a way that others want to honor him as well. We need to be like those who say, I am not going to put up with people disrespecting my Father's house. I'm not encouraging you to take a spear, okay? I don't want you to get a javelin or anything like that. But we do need to be those people who are zealous for his house to the point that we will stand up for the sanctity of his house, right? And not tolerate things that would degrade and desecrate. Amen? Well, thank you, all three of you. All right. Hophni and Pinchas did the opposite. They dishonored him before the people, and again, as I said, the people began to abhor the offering of the Lord. It left a bad impression upon them because how the Lord was being represented by Eli and his two sons. And so then, because of this, eventually God sends an unnamed prophet to Eli saying this in 1 Samuel chapter 2, beginning in verse 30. Therefore, the Lord God of Israel says, I said indeed that your house and the house of your father would walk before me forever. But now, the Lord says, far be it from me, for those who honor me, I will honor, and those who despise me shall be lightly esteemed. Behold, the days are coming that I will cut off your arm and the arm of your father's house, so that there will not be an old man in your house. And you will see an enemy in my dwelling place, despite all the good which God does for Israel. And there shall not be an old man in your house forever. But any of your men whom I do not cut off from my altar shall consume your eyes and grieve your heart. And all the descendants of your house shall die in the flower of their age. Now this shall be a sign to you that will come upon your 2 sons, on Hophni and Pinchas. In one day they shall die, both of them. Then I will raise up for myself a faithful priest, who shall do according to what is in my heart and in my mind, and I will build him a sure house, and he shall walk before my anointed forever. Didn't bother to read it, but as you get to the end of this prophet's declaration to Eli the high priest, his response is kind of like, oh well, the Lord's going to do what the Lord's going to do. Man, that's a hardened heart if you ask me. It's an apathetic heart. Anyway, there are 2 points here from these verses we read that I want to take note of. Number 1, God said that because of this situation that an enemy would be in his dwelling place, in his sacred space. Instead of his presence, there would be another presence. And if you're interested, the Hebrew word that is translated enemy is zar, zaderesh, zar, which means a rival, a foe, an adversary, an oppressor, but it also means pressure, stress, straits. So a foe will be in my dwelling place. And so because his presence was no longer there, it wasn't going to stay vacant. We've talked about this many times as well. His presence isn't there. It doesn't remain vacant. It's going to be inhabited by something or someone. And if it's not his presence, it's going to be another presence. But that presence, the latter one, is not going to have the best interests of God's people at heart. It's going to be an adversary. It's going to be an oppressor. Think of what Paul speaks of when he talks about that in the last days, the Antichrist, the Anti-Messiah, is going to go into that place that is reserved for God because he considers himself to be above God. He considers himself to be God. And here's how I know that God's not going to be in that particular house, because the Antichrist goes in and inhabits that sacred space. So again, he says an enemy is going to be in my dwelling place. So we can conclude that if we do not honor him, if we do not respect and fear him, and especially in a space that we've dedicated to him, how long should we expect that he would remain in that sacred space? Don't you know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit? Right? And yet, if we continually invite things that are unclean, unholy, into this body, how long should we expect that he's going to remain? I'm not answering the question, I'm asking the question, because I'm not going to play God and try to answer the question. It just seems to me that it is very dangerous for us to think that we can want his presence on one hand and invite everything else on the other. All right? By the way, I'm not talking to you, sharing with you, because we're all in this together, right? In fact, Beth and I bear a big chunk of the responsibility in regard to all these kind of things. Because when his presence departs, as I said, the space does not remain empty. It's going to be inhabited by something else or someone else. Second point is this. He says he's going to raise up a faithful priest for himself, which means that even when he has to correct his people in a very, very dramatic way, he is not going to forsake his people. He's going to raise up someone who will be faithful to him to guide his people. So, if I don't do what I'm supposed to do, he will replace me and find somebody who will. But if that goes for me, it goes for you too. You don't do what he's called you to do, he'll find somebody else that will. If this congregation doesn't do what he's called us to do, he'll shut this one down and he'll raise up another one that'll do what he's called those people to do. Now, I don't want him to have to get rid of me to find somebody to replace me. Okay? I just want to do what I'm supposed to do. I know you feel that way as well. I don't want him to have to shut down this congregation to raise up some other congregation to do something that we were supposed to do. I just want him to raise up another congregation that'll do what they're supposed to do and another one that'll do what they're supposed to do because we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. All right, now we all want that, right? Well, I know we all want it, but we also have to make certain that we're dedicated to do the work to ensure that that happens. And by that, we need to make certain that these unclean things are held at bay, that we do not allow his house to be desecrated, to be disrespected. Because, again, he's not going to forsake his people. He's not going to forsake his will and his purpose. He will raise up someone to guide his people, a faithful priest who will shepherd his people according to his will, which is to say, at least in part, to teach his people to honor and to respect him. I think people my age, I'm 60, I think people my age and older, even some who are a little younger than I am, remember a time when it was a rarity or it was the exception for children to backtalk their parents. Who remembers those days when that was the exception? Okay? Because in my day, anyway, in my house, if I backtalk my dad too sassy, I might be picking myself up out of the floor, quite honestly. And some people say, oh, that's awful. Well, I didn't backtalk him, did I? What I'm getting at is, how can we expect our children to respect God's house if they don't respect your house? Because they're looking at us as an example, right? And so then, if you do not expect respect in your house, it's going to be very hard for you to expect your children to respect his house. In other words, it starts at home, doesn't it? Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be those who try you and test you and see what you're going to do and all those kinds of things, because they will. I did. You probably did too. But there does need to be a standard. There does need to be an expectation in our homes. Godly standards, nothing arbitrary, not tyrannical, but there do need to be these expectations in our homes that certain behavior is expected and certain behavior is forbidden. There's just certain things you're not going to do in my house. Isn't that right, Mrs. Cloud? Okay? And if you do those things and you cannot come around to our way of thinking, you're not going to be there much longer. And I know that some people think that's just awful. No, that's just the way it is. And that's the way it's supposed to be, quite frankly. Because at the end, I'm going to have to stand before him and give an account. And you're not going to be there to support me. You're going to be off in the corner, cowering, waiting your turn. That's what we're all going to be doing. All right, so my point once again is, how can we expect others to respect his house if we don't expect them to respect our house? And our houses need to be these little tabernacles, these little sanctuaries where he resides, where he presides, where he's king, and his authority rules our house, and we administer his way of doing things in our homes. Is that not right? Okay? So, if your children are telling you what to do, something's wrong. I need a filter right now. If your children or grandchildren are throwing a flying duck fit because you took their phone away from them, you need to throw that thing away. Because it's got too much power in their life, okay? And they might be, and folks, listen, they might be watching us. So keep that in mind. All right. So all I'm trying to say is that we need to teach the people to honor and respect the Almighty. And part of that is it begins in our home. And one of the things that we learned about Eli is that he did not have that expectation of his two sons. He did not demand that they respect God's house. But God's not going to leave his people abandoned. And so even before the death of Eli and his sons, God had Samuel waiting in the wings. So before he brings an end to one season, he has already prepared for the next. That's the second thing I wanted you to see out of what the lessons are there to learn from Shiloh. Now, we came down this trail talking about Shiloh and the tabernacle and Eli and his two sons because we wanted to see what happened at Shiloh. And why did we want to see what happened there? Because it's in response to the question that Jeremiah posed and that Yeshua quoted when he threw people out of his father's house, saying, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it into something else. You've made it into something that God didn't intend. And so he showed zeal. He showed a healthy respect for God's house. And he demanded that other people show that same respect. So again, I'm not going to recommend that anybody ever think they're justified in taking a javelin after someone. Okay? And I know that from time to time, we've fantasized about that. Some people are looking up like this. I am not recommending that you fashion a whip and take it to somebody. I'm not saying that. But I am challenging us all to be very diligent in our duty to honor our Father by honoring his house. As I've said many times, to some degree, God has entrusted his reputation to us. He's entrusted his reputation to us. And so we need to be very careful how we represent him to others anywhere we go. Whether it's here, whether it's the market, whether it's on the job, whatever it is, we need to be very careful about how we treat his reputation. Because to do anything that brings reproach on his name does what to his name? Profanes. When we do anything that brings reproach on his name, wherever we're at, it profanes his name before the people. And so we're to sanctify his name, which includes being respectful of his name and his house and all the things that pertain to God. So can I just say this kind of as a footnote? Here's something I'm going to ask of you and something I'm going to expect of you going forward. When we're in here for worship, I'm not talking about when we're in here during Oneg or Fam Jam or anything like that, but when we are in here for worship and songs are being sung and people are singing and praising and the team over here, the sign language team, is leading in worship, that is not the time for you to have a long, drawn-out conversation at the back of the room. Okay? If you get a phone call, it may be a very important phone call, and if it is, just be respectful to his house and take it out yonder. All right? If you have to have a long, drawn-out conversation with somebody during that time that we're mentioning, be so kind to take it out there. But let's show respect for his house. That's not asking too much, is it? Okay, good. Good. And I'll be commissioning some men to help you remember that, should you forget, who will politely but firmly suggest that you take that conversation out into the hallway so that the others around you will not be, what they're doing will not be interrupted and they will not be distracted by what you got going on. And again, I don't think that's asking too much, is it? Okay? And it's not because I'm trying to be a tyrant and a control freak and all that kind of stuff, but I am going to take control of what the Father's entrusted to me, and it behooves me to expect that everybody in here will respect his house. Amen? Because as we see in the case of Zimri and Cosby, Hophni and Pinchas, blatant disrespect for God's house and his presence doesn't end well. It doesn't end well for those people who participate in those acts of rebellion. It doesn't end well for those who enticed God's people to participate in rebellion, the Midianites. Didn't work out good for them. Didn't work out good for Balaam. It doesn't even end well for those that God uses to chastise his people because of their rebellion. Because the Philistines took the ark, but the ark couldn't stay with the Philistines because they had hemorrhoids. Of all the things that he could have struck them with, hemorrhoids. Anyway, hey, it's in the Bible. In other words, it didn't end well for them either. So disregard for the Almighty is a losing proposition all the way around. On the other hand, genuine zeal and respect for him and for his house leads to promotion. It leads to prosperity. It leads to peace. So then, how we represent the Almighty before others is obviously very important. You know that there are people in this world who want nothing to do with God. They want nothing to do with God because, well, not because God did anything to them, but because people who say they represented God did something to them. There are people who claim to be atheists because of this kind of a situation, because of how God was represented to them or how some of God's people behaved. Now, I know that it's not always because we did something wrong. There are people in this world who don't want to have anything to do with God because God's about boundaries. God's about, actually, saying no to yourself. And some people can't handle the word no. Some people can't handle it. So there is that. But then there are those cases where people who claim to be atheists or they don't want anything to do with God, understandably are disillusioned because of things that God's people did. So there is that. We have to own up to that. So here's my point. We need to be very careful about how we represent him to others. All the time, every day. So now let's go to Numbers chapter 27, verse 12. Now the Lord said to Moses, "Go up into the Mount Abarim and see the land which I have given to the children of Israel. And when you have seen it, you also shall be gathered to your people as Aaron your brother was gathered. For in the wilderness of Zin, during the strife of the congregation, you rebelled against my command to hallow me, to sanctify me at the waters before their eyes." So even if your name is Moses, especially if your name is Moses, it's important how you represent God before the people. It's very, very important how Beth and I represent the Father before this congregation. Those who are here and those who are watching out there. It's very important. And I'm okay with that as long as I'm doing it faithfully and authentically. In other words, it's not really important to me that I necessarily meet your expectations. And I don't say that to be disrespectful. Okay? I don't. But as you've heard me say time and again, if I have to choose between offending you and offending him, I will offend you. Okay? That's just how I'm going to live. And that, by the way, that's how we all should live. Right? You shouldn't try to live up to my expectations if my expectations are anything other than his, and vice versa. You understand what I'm trying to say here? Okay? So, it is very important how we represent the Father before others. How we represent the Almighty to others is critical because, you see, we have to respect him in that. That's what he wants of us. That's what he demands of us because he has entrusted his reputation to us to a certain degree. And we have to respect what he says. It stands to reason that if we are to show him proper respect, then the things of God, those things that pertain to him, should be shown respect as well. And, as we just read, we have to be able to respect what he says, when he says it, how he says it, even if he's telling us no. That whatever he says on the matter should stand. And, Moses is being told, you're not going to go into the land. Here's why you're not going to go into the land, because you didn't hallow me before the eyes of the people. Now, how did he take that? Well, he had gone to God before to get him to relent on things. Stand out of the way, Moses. I'm going to wipe these people out, and I'm going to raise up a nation from you. What did he do? He interceded. And then what did God say? All right, my presence will go with you. I'm not going to kill them all. All right? That happened twice. So now he's being told you can't go into the land. And this is what he's been focused on for a long time. This is what he's been all about for a long, long time. And he's put up with a lot to get to this point. And now the Father says, you're not going into the land. And so in response to that, Moses prays incessantly to enter the land. So Deuteronomy chapter 3, verse 23. Then I pleaded with the Lord at that time, saying, O Lord God, you have begun to show your servant your greatness and your mighty hand. For what God is there in heaven or on earth that can do anything like your works and your mighty deeds? I pray, let me cross over and see the good land beyond the Jordan, those pleasant mountains in Lebanon. But the Lord was angry with me on your account and would not listen to me. That really stood out to me when I read that. There are some things that he just quits listening to us about. Because sometimes when he says no, no means no. And don't come back to me about this again. No means no. So then, he was angry with me on your account and would not listen to me. So the Lord said to me, enough of that. Speak no more to me of this matter, but go up to the top of Pisgah and lift your eyes toward the west, the north, the south, and the east, and behold it with your eyes, for you shall not cross over this Jordan. But command Joshua and encourage him and strengthen him, for he shall go over before this people, and he shall cause them to inherit the land which you will see. And so again, even if your name is Moses, sometimes the word no means no. I think that you and I, and especially because we live in the West, and especially because we live in America, and in America the mindset is, well, watch this. Right? You're told no, we say, well, we'll find a way to do it anyway. You know? There are people in this world that if you set up a yellow tape that says do not cross, they'll say, wonder why. Let me cross that and find out. But with God, sometimes when he says no, you and I need to learn to respect that, to honor that. And there are some things that he has said no to. There are some things that he says are not appropriate behavior for his people. And it's not a gray area. There are some things he says are not to come into my house, that are not to be mentioned among my people. He said no. And yet, as his people, for all these many generations, what do we keep doing? We keep thinking that we're going to be the exception to when he said no. We need to quit doing that and just let him be the final arbiter of these things. Am I making any sense to anybody? All right. Sometimes he's determined to matter, and that's that. Now, it is somewhat of a consolation that Moses was permitted to see the land. He wasn't just, so mad at him that he wasn't going to at least allow him to see what he's been working toward all these many years. So he shows Moses the land from the mountains of Abarim, which are Pisgah, Mount Nebo, which is just across the Jordan River. I mean, you can see these mountains from the Israeli side very easily. So you can see Israel pretty easily from that side. And so he's right there, but he's not going to let him go in. So he sees how close the people are to the land, and he dies knowing that they're going to enter the land very soon. Now, rabbinical commentary says that when God showed him the land, he showed it all to him. He didn't just see the horizon out there. He showed him all of the land. In fact, where we read in Deuteronomy that he wanted to see those pleasant mountains, in Hebrew it actually says he wanted to see this goodly mountain, which some believe is referring to the fact he wanted to see, where's that mountain that you're going to set your name? Where's your house going to be built? Which, if that's accurate, and I kind of believe it is, it tells me what's on the man's mind. What is he focusing on? What is he thinking about? So that reminds me of this passage, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 13. It's not just speaking of Moses, it's speaking of a lot of people here, but the writer says, these all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar, were assured of them, embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. So even in his correction of Moses, you see God's compassion. And he is allowing him to see that this that I promised you and these people, it's right there. It's going to come to pass. Even though Moses doesn't get to walk in with them, he gets to see. He gets to see the land, and he knows they're about to go into the land. In other words, from the compassionate side of things, he didn't require Moses to die not having seen the promise. So I said all that to say this. If he did that for Moses and Abraham and these guys and all those people, it stands to reason he would do the same for us. Wouldn't he? Bottom line is this. We are to believe him. Whether or not we get to realize some of the promises that he's made, I think he'll let us see them. Even if we don't get to realize them, we'll get to see them, to see they're about to take place, even if we're at the end of our tenure. But bottom line again is believing him, we honor him. When we believe him, we honor him. The fact that Moses was not allowed to go into the land demonstrates that there are some who don't enter the land. They lead others to it. And perhaps that was their sole purpose, to lead people to a certain point, to prepare people for what was coming next. Moses served the purpose of leading the people through the wilderness, but Joshua was going to be the one to lead them into the land. Deuteronomy 31, verse 1 and 2. Then Moses went and spoke these words to all Israel, and he said to them, I am 120 years old today. I can no longer go out and come in. Also, the Lord has said to me, you shall not cross over this Jordan. 120 years is a long time. You know, there are some things that are not permitted in this place. No, my son was saying I'm halfway there. I can see it. No, anyway. Yeah, right. He'll be there before you know it, right? 120 years is a long time, but that is not to indicate that Moses was old and feeble and decrepit and all this. The Bible says that his eyes were not dim, nor his natural vigor diminished. It's just that at 120 years, 40 years of leading the people through the wilderness, we understand that his season to do that is coming to an end. All right? We understand that everyone has a purpose, right? You believe you were born for a purpose. Hopefully you believe that. You should believe that. If you don't, start believing it. Everybody in this room and everybody's watching, the Father placed here for a purpose. And that purpose is for a season. So that means that when one season comes to a conclusion, and with it that purpose, another season begins for another purpose. For instance, John the Baptist is the one out in the wilderness preparing the way of the Lord, make straight the crooked paths, etc. But when he sees the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, what did he say? That he may increase, I have to decrease. He understood that his season and his purpose was coming to a close. So his mission was to prepare the way, and when he'd fulfill that mission, then he knew that it was time for him to step aside and the Messiah to step into his role. So likewise, Moses is understanding that his tenure is coming to a close so that Joshua could assume his role. Numbers 27, verse 15, then Moses spoke to the Lord, saying, let the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, set a man over the congregation who may go out before them and go in before them, who may lead them out and bring them in, that the congregation of the Lord may not be like sheep which have no shepherd. And the Lord said to Moses, take Joshua the son of Nun with you, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay your hand on him. Set him before Eleazar the priest and before all the congregation, and inaugurate him in their sight. And you shall give some of your authority to him, that all the congregation of the children of Israel may be obedient. So what is meant by go out before them and go in before them? He says that here, And when we read Deuteronomy 31, he said, I can no longer go out and come in. What does that mean? Here's the rabbinical thought, that the leader of the congregation has to be someone who can be a leader in war and a shepherd in peace. In times of war, he's not going to remain in the back and leave danger to the others, but he is going to lead them out. He's going to lead by example. And he's following God. And in doing that, he is sanctifying God, because he is demonstrating confidence, faith, belief, respect, honor to God. And so by going out, he's going out before them to lead them into battle. And leading them in, or to bring them in times of peace, he's going to lead them to a place where there's pasture and where there is safety. And so then what Moses is asking, here's what he's thinking about. Having been their shepherd, he doesn't want them to be like sheep that have no shepherd. Because if they're like sheep having no shepherd, what's going to happen to the sheep? They're going to be scattered. They're going to be exposed to attacks from all the different predators. By the way, we see the same sentiment from Yeshua, don't we? Because in Matthew 9, he said he saw the multitudes and he was moved with compassion for them because they were weary and scattered like sheep having no shepherd. So I read all of these things to make this point. Even though Moses is not allowed to enter the land. And again, why is he not allowed to enter the land? Because in a fit of anger, he did not hallow God in the eyes of the people. He did not represent God well at that moment when he got angry. He let his emotions take over for just a moment, and he did not hallow God in the eyes of the people. Even though that happened, even though he's not going to be allowed to enter the land, what do we see? That he still honors God by remaining a shepherd until the very end. He is concerned that we need to make certain that he needs to make certain there is someone in place who is going to shepherd the people in his absence. So that prompted me to think this way. God is showing him the land, and he's seen the land laid out before him. He may be considering that pleasant mountain where the house of God will one day sit. But what is he thinking about as he's looking at all this? Is he thinking about the future, or is he maybe thinking about the past, some of the things that have happened all these past 40 years, or even beyond that, all the things that God has done in his life, how he preserved him from a child and trained him in the house of Pharaoh, and then all the different things that happened, and the journey out of Egypt, and maybe even thinking about all the people who started out with us who are no longer with us. Maybe he's thinking about those kinds of things too. But through all of that, we see that he's still thinking in terms of shepherding this people, remaining a shepherd. And he is assured that God is not going to forsake his people. So then, as Moses' time comes to an end, God already had someone in position. Joshua is waiting in the wings, ready to step into his calling. Let me stop right here and say this. No, I am not thinking about stepping aside, stepping down, leaving, going anywhere. Okay, that's not why we're saying this, okay? Just in case somebody might be thinking that. No, that's not why we're talking about this. We're talking about this in terms of we have a season that has been assigned to us individually. We've been given a season. And all of us as individuals and families, we make up this congregation. And this congregation is only going to be as strong as the weakest among us. So every one of us who come in to be part of this congregation, we're part of the family of God, we have a purpose. And if he's brought us here, there's a purpose to be served here. And we're going to be given a season for that purpose to come to pass. But we also need to understand that there will be a time when that season draws to a close. And so we need to do everything in our power to fulfill our purpose in the time that he's given us. That's why I'm saying this. Okay. And if we do our job right, then that next generation that's coming up behind us will have seen how you and we together honor and respect him, and how we want to serve him, and what we've sacrificed in order to do that, the things that we've given up, the things that we've denied ourselves in an attempt to honor him. They'll see that. They'll be trained in that. And then this generation will be coming up behind us. And then when their season is over, there will be another generation coming up behind them. That's the way he designed it. Because whatever he started, he's not going to see it fail. He is going to have his way. His will is going to prevail in the earth. He will have a people. He will have a remnant of people, but he will have a people, right? So it's important to understand that we have a season that we've been allotted, and we need to do everything in our power to fulfill his purpose in us and through us during that season. And part of that is to show honor and respect for him and his house, so that the next generation will propagate that honor and respect and fear of God into the next generation. So when then it comes time for us to turn to the Joshuas, so to speak, that we've done our job well and equipped them to do what God has called them to do. I hope it makes sense in my head. I hope it's making sense coming out of my mouth. So then Moses is to go before the people and confer authority upon Joshua to ordain him for the task ahead. Hebrew term is smicha. Smicha. That's not micha, smicha. All right? But it's samech mem yud chaf he, smicha. And it means to ordain, it means to support. If it comes from the root word samech, which is samech, the letter samech, mem chaf sofi. And samech is a circle or a ring. And a circle infers continuity, perpetuity. Things go on and on and on. And so in this particular case, what it means here is all the things that Moses did, or God did in and through Moses and for that generation, is going to support what God is going to do in and through Joshua in that generation. And then beyond that, it was supposed to be that generation and what God did in and through them was to support that next generation, and on and on and on, even until this very day. So the idea behind samech or smicha is that everything that follows the prior is going to be supported by the prior, and it's going to be founded upon what comes before, and it's going to build on that. Again, meaning that what God starts, he intends to finish. He's going to see to it. Sometimes his plans gets frustrated because we do stupid. Doesn't stop his plans. It can frustrate it. It might even delay it a little bit sometimes, maybe. We do the Baal Peor thing, or we do the Shiloh thing. But in the end, he prevails. His will prevails. He will raise up faithful priests. He will raise up Joshua's. So I'm almost done, but just a few closing thoughts here. In the words of Solomon, everything and everyone has a purpose, and every purpose has a season. Every season has a reason. Some of them are to build up, some of them are to tear down, some of them are to plant, some of them are to pluck up. And whatever the season is, it's for that purpose to be served. But when it's time to be scattering stones, you don't gather. But when it's time to gather, you don't scatter. So how important is it for our season to get lined up with what season he's in? This is where you can get involved if you'd like. It's pretty important that the season that we're in, or that we think we're in, lines up with what he's actually doing. Amen? Because we don't want to be working against him, do we? That's a losing proposition. So, we need to know his heart. We need to know his mind. And he said he would raise up a faithful priest who would do that. And in conjunction with that, this idea of respect and honor and fear and challenging one another to have a healthy dose of godly fear and respect for him and for his house goes hand in glove with that concept of being a faithful priest. We've had a season of rebellion and disrespect and dishonor, and people just think they can do whatever they want to do and act however they like, and everybody's just got to get over it. And I'm talking about in the people of God. I think that season needs to come to a close. I think that needs to come to an end. Every one of us have come into this world to serve his purpose. And as I said, for a season. And when that season comes to a close, it's just the beginning of another thing that God is doing. So then, there will come a time then when he will require that Beth and I step aside. And somebody will be prepared to step up into our place. And that goes for every position in this congregation. There will come a day, I don't know when, but there will come a day, and it shouldn't be that any congregation, anything that God has breathed, it should never be that it is predicated on one person or even one family. It should be predicated on his purpose, right? And what he's doing, right? So it's really important that we all of us collectively, do our job, function in our purpose, so that what he is doing in our fellowship, in our assembly, in our community is living, it's breathing, it's active, it's moving, it's advancing, it's growing, it's maturing, it's producing fruit that's going to be propagated into the next generation and the generation after that, should he tarry his return, or should he delay his return. Okay? So some of these things that I've been talking about, that's the idea behind it. Because there will come a day that we'll have to step aside. You'll have to step aside. There will come a day that we're going to depart this world. There will come a day that we have to step out of this world. And hopefully, when that day comes, hopefully when it's time for us to step out of whatever role and function we have in a congregation, hopefully when the day comes for us to step aside or to depart, we will have fulfilled our purpose. I want it to be said of me what was said of Joshua, that he did not leave one thing undone that Moses had commanded him to do. He did it all. He completed it in the season that was allotted him. So I guess my main point here is, at the end, let's make certain that we're serving our purpose. Let's make certain that we understand that we've been given a season. We need to do everything in our power to work very diligently to fulfill that purpose. And in fulfilling that purpose, we show respect and honor for the Almighty. Because if he made us for this, and we're too busy doing that, doesn't that show dishonor and disrespect? But a servant says, whatever you say, I will hear and I will do. Right? Let's have a zeal for his house that compels us to see his will fulfilled. Let's, not with a javelin, but let's chase out everything that does not conform to his will, that does not conducive to the sanctity of his house. And let's put an end to all of the activity that causes others to disdain his house. There's just some things that aren't permitted. And I think most everybody in this room and watching knows what those things are. We do. So let's just quit doing the things that he said don't do. Was quit acting the way he said quit. Don't act like that. That's not becoming of my people. And let's challenge one another. Let's challenge one another to expect of one another a certain deportment and behavior, an attitude, and a way of living, a way of speaking that honors and sanctifies him. We really shouldn't have to talk about these things, should we? And yet, we have to talk about these things because it's been that way from the beginning. But let me say this again. If there is a day coming upon the earth that is going to be unlike anything the world has ever seen or will ever see again, according to the words of Yeshua, because he's always worked through imperfect people just like you and me, it seems that the time has come for there to be a people unlike anything the world has ever seen or will ever see again. And it's not by might, it's not by power, but it's by his Spirit, says the Lord of hosts. And so there needs to be a people who are zealous for their God, zealous for his house, and aren't as concerned about what everybody else thinks as much as they're concerned about what he thinks, what he says, right? Amen? So, let us not allow his house to become something that was never intended to be. David said, zeal for your house has eaten me up. To the point that my brothers and sisters don't even recognize me. And what that says to me, he is so zealous for God's house that those of his flesh that aren't zealous for God's house don't really have a whole lot to do with him. Which tells me that he's not as concerned about what they think as much as he is what he thinks. All right? So let's have a zeal for his house. So, last thought. You know, there are people in this world who have hijacked the rainbow. You're aware of that, right? You know, that the Father set in the sky to remind him that he's not going to destroy the earth with a flood of waters anymore because there was a bunch of rebellious people on the earth in those days. And so ironically, a bunch of rebellious people have adopted that as their logo. That's not the end of the story. I don't know how it's going to end, but that is not the end of the story. I guarantee you he's going to reclaim that. But anyway. But you're thinking, okay, so what has that got to do with what we've been talking about? Well, if they can hijack the rainbow, I'm going to hijack a song. R-E-S-P-E-C-T. You better find out what that means to me. I'll stop there. No, in all seriousness, let's be challenged, all of us, starting with me. We come together on Shabbat or any other holy day or any other time that we say we are here to honor him, then let us do that. Let's honor him. Let's leave all of the stuff out there. And when we come into this sacred space, let's truly respect his house as a place of his presence. Amen? That's all I'm saying.